1.1 Conceptual Introduction: Education at the Crossroads of Civilization. Education stands today at the crossroads of history. On one path lies unprecedented access to information, fueled by digital technology and artificial intelligence. On the other, a growing emptiness of meaning and a loss of ethical direction. Humanity now lives in an age where connectivity has increased, but community has weakened, where knowledge has expanded, but wisdom has declined. This paradox marks the defining crisis of modern learning, a condition in which the human mind is stimulated, but the soul remains neglected. The digital world allows us to learn everything except how to live wisely. It is this awareness that gives birth to the Ecosystem Transformative Education (ED) paradigm, a framework that views education not as the transfer of content, but as the transformation of character. ET begins from a radical premise that learning is a living process, dynamic, ethical, and sacred. It is not confined to classrooms or institutions, but unfolds in every human encounter with truth. Education must therefore be reimagined as an ecosystem of transformation, where every part of the process, policy, pedagogy, technology, and culture, works together to nurture becoming, not merely knowing. ET proposes a return to the ancient yet eternal purpose of education, to shape the whole human being, Insan Kama, one whose intelligence serves compassion, whose reasoning serves conscience, and whose learning serves life itself. 1.2 Theoretical Foundation: Triadic Roots of the Transformative Model. The theoretical framework of ET arises from the intersection of three great traditions: Islamic philosophy of education, systems theory, and transformative learning theory. Together, they form the triple helix of ET, the spiritual, systemic, and reflective dimensions of transformation. The Islamic philosophy of education provides the moral and spiritual foundation. It defines education through three interconnected processes: tarbiyah, talim, and tadib. Tarbiyah nurtures growth in accordance with divine purpose, shaping the learner as part of a greater moral ecology. Talim transmits knowledge and cultivates intellectual clarity. Tadib perfects ethical refinement and moral responsibility. These three layers merge into a unified vision where learning is not the acquisition of facts, but the formation of being. The systems theory, articulated by Ludwig von Bertalanffy, contributes the ecological dimension of ET. Education, seen through this lens, is a living system, open, adaptive, and self-organizing. Transformation does not result from rigid control, but from intelligent feedback, continuous learning, and dynamic balance. ET adopts this principle to design education as a responsive organism that evolves through reflection and innovation. Finally, transformative learning theory, as developed by Jacques Mezereau, introduces the element of consciousness. It emphasizes that true learning occurs when one's worldview is challenged, re-examined, and restructured through critical reflection and dialogue. ET expands this by embedding spirituality as the highest form of reflection, tafakkur, intellectual contemplation, integrated with tazakkur, spiritual remembrance. The union of these traditions forms the intellectual skeleton of ET, knowledge guided by ethics, systems driven by purpose, and transformation sustained by faith. 1.3 Philosophical Statement: The Ontology of Becoming. ET begins with an ontological conviction that education is life itself, a continuous act of becoming. Learning is not an event that happens to humans. It is the process through which humans become more fully themselves. In this sense, ET does not define education as a preparation for life, but as life in motion. Its epistemology recognizes that human intelligence is plural, as captured by the Human Index, HUX, a synthesis of 10 intelligences that form the architecture of the complete human being. Learning is not confined to logic or memory, but extends into emotion, creativity, ethics, social empathy, and spiritual insight. The axiology of ET, or its moral compass, is founded on tawazun, the balance between intellect and intuition, science and spirituality, self, and society. It teaches that every educational act must be evaluated not only by its efficiency, but by its ethical impact. In this triadic philosophical structure, ontology of life, epistemology of holistic intelligence, and axiology of balance, ET finds its identity as a living philosophy of transformation. ET thus redefines the purpose of education in one elegant sentence: to form human beings who think with reason, act with conscience, and live with compassion. In this view, a university is not a factory of certificates, but a garden of souls, a place where intellect grows under the sunlight of morality and the rain of wisdom. 1.4. Historical context: the birth of a transformative paradigm. ET emerged in response to two simultaneous revolutions shaping the 21st century, the AI revolution and the OI revolution. The former transformed machines into thinkers, while the latter transformed institutions into algorithmic systems. Both increased efficiency but risked erasing humanity. Artificial intelligence, AI, has automated reasoning but cannot reproduce moral judgment. Organizational intelligence, OI, has optimized systems but often ignored meaning. The result is an educational structure that is smart but not wise, efficient but not ethical. ET responds by integrating AI, OI, and HI, human intelligence, into a balanced ecosystem where speed is guided by sincerity, automation is grounded in adab, and analytics are moderated by awareness. It seeks not to reject progress, but to reframe it, transforming technological evolution into ethical revolution. Historically, this paradigm resonates with the spirit of the Islamic Golden Age, when education unified science, faith, and art within the civilizational ethic of hikmah, wisdom. ET revives that harmony, positioning education once again as the axis of civilization, not merely its instrument. 1.5. Scriptural inspiration: transformation as divine law. The Quran declares a profound principle of transformation. Indeed, Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves.
Quran Surat Irad Atrizeg Hainzeg.
This verse establishes transformation, tagir, as a divine law, an unchanging principle of cosmic justice. Change begins not in systems or institutions, but in the soul. It is the moral and spiritual awakening of individuals that drives the renewal of societies. ET interprets this verse as the theological foundation of transformative education. Learning, in this vision, is an act of ibadah, a sacred striving to reform the self, islah al-nafs, so that society may be reformed. Education thus becomes a bridge between the inner and outer worlds, between personal awakening and collective renewal. 1.6. Conceptual framework: layers and processes of transformation. ET defines transformation across three interrelated layers of human and institutional life. The first is the individual layer, where education cultivates ethical intelligence, self-awareness, and spiritual resilience, the renewal of the person. The second is the institutional layer, where learning organizations adopt adaptive systems, innovation feedback, and moral governance, the renewal of structure. The third is the civilizational layer, where education nurtures cultural wisdom, unity of purpose, and global harmony, the renewal of humanity. Across these layers, ET operates through four recursive processes known as the spiral of transformation: policy, PK, Tibin, TB, Agile, AG, and sustainable culture, SC. Policy sets the ethical foundation of governance, ensuring that decisions are guided by adab. Tibin represents the creative emergence of innovation, the pulse of renewal that prevents stagnation. Agile embodies the dynamic process of adaptation, allowing systems to evolve without losing values. Sustainable culture completes the cycle, embedding transformation into the collective habits and traditions of the institution. In this spiral, transformation becomes perpetual, a living organism rather than a static reform. 1.7. Application to modern education: from structure to spirit. In practical terms, ET manifests through the design of holistic learning systems. It integrates human index, HUX, instruments to assess students not merely by cognitive ability, but by moral growth, empathy, and creativity. It weaves AI, ethics curricula into the Merdeka Belajar Campus Merdeka (MBCAM) framework, ensuring that freedom of learning is accompanied by freedom of conscience. It encourages the formation of reflective forums, spaces such as Friday discussions, spiritual circles, and ethical dialogues, where institutions engage in continuous introspection. Through initiatives like the Smart Campus Umaha, ET merges digital innovation with moral governance, building a university that is both technologically advanced and ethically grounded. In all these applications, the focus remains the same: to make education a transformative culture, not a mechanical system. 1.8. Ethical reflection: the balance between change and conscience. Transformation without ethics leads to chaos. Ethics without transformation leads to stagnation. ET stands as the bridge between these two extremes, proposing a path of reflective dynamism. It teaches that change must be guided by conscience and that progress must never outpace moral integrity. The educator, in this context, becomes a guardian of balance. Technology, policy, and curriculum are understood as tools, not ends. The true aim of all educational effort is the realization of Insan Kamil, the complete human being who embodies intellect, compassion, and purpose. 1.9. Implications for the future: education as moral compass. The 21st century will not be led by those who know the most, but by those who reflect the deepest. As knowledge expands and artificial intelligence accelerates, the danger is not ignorance, but the absence of wisdom. ET offers a vision where education becomes the moral compass of the AI age, ensuring that technological evolution is balanced by ethical evolution. Universities, within the ET framework, are not institutions of employment, but ecosystems of enlightenment. Their graduates are not mere workers of knowledge, but custodians of meaning, individuals who think critically, feel deeply, and act nobly. 1.10. Summary statement: the renewal of the human spirit. Academic Unit Number 1 concludes that education must evolve from knowledge transmission to ethical transformation. The ecosystem transformative education provides the bridge between intellect and morality, between science and soul, between learning and life. It redefines education as an act of worship, a journey of awakening, and a foundation of civilization. ET proclaims that the future of humanity depends not on how much we know, but on how deeply we transform through what we know. It is this conviction, that education is the living art of becoming more human, that ignites the movement of ET toward its next exploration, the diagnosis of the crisis of meaning in the digital age. Perfect direction, Prof. Sparkles. We will now rebuild Academic Unit Number 2, the crisis of meaning in the digital age, into a continuous, narrative exposition following the AEDRI book reference style. Rich paragraphs, no bullet points, deeply layered analysis, with clear subtopics that flow naturally like a philosophical, educational treatise.
Ecosystem Transformative Education, ETE. Academic Unit Nomor
2. The Crisis of Meaning in the Digital Age. 2.1. Conceptual Introduction: the Paradox of Digital Enlightenment. The digital age was heralded as the dawn of human enlightenment. It promised connectivity across continents, access to limitless information, and the democratization of knowledge that previous generations could only dream of. Yet, as our screens glowed brighter, our understanding of life dimmed. Humanity now lives in an era where information has multiplied, but meaning has diminished. Education, which once guided the human spirit toward wisdom and virtue, has been reduced to a mechanistic process of data transmission and credential accumulation. This paradox defines what scholars call the crisis of meaning, a deep existential confusion in which learners know everything except why they learn. The very technologies that were designed to free the human mind from ignorance have, paradoxically, entrapped it in distraction and superficiality. Knowledge is now fragmented into endless bits, stripped from the holistic narratives that once gave it context and moral direction. The ecosystem transformative education, EE, model begins precisely at this point, not to reject technology, but to rehumanize it, to bring back depth where there is only speed, and to restore ethics where there is only efficiency. ET argues that true education is not the transfer of data, but the transformation of consciousness. 2.2. Historical trajectory of the meaning crisis. The crisis of meaning did not emerge spontaneously. It evolved through several historical epochs that gradually reshaped the purpose and nature of education. The first epoch was the Industrial Age, which converted schools into engines of uniform productivity. In this period, education was organized like a factory, structured, repetitive, and efficiency-oriented. Students were trained to fit into the machinery of production rather than to cultivate their unique potentials as moral and reflective beings. The second epoch, technological modernity, intensified the focus on speed and measurement. Education was increasingly defined by its capacity to serve industrial and economic demands, while the inner dimensions of learning, such as contemplation, empathy, and ethical reflection, were sidelined as non-essential. The third epoch, digital modernity, brought about an explosion of access to information. Yet, this abundance produced an unintended consequence: fragmentation. Truth became algorithmic, filtered through the logic of likes, shares, and trends. The digital learner could access all knowledge instantly, but lacked the patience to dwell in reflection. Finally, the age of artificial intelligence has pushed this trajectory to its extreme. Machines now think, write, and even teach, but without conscience or compassion. Humanity has gained intelligence without introspection. In this context, ET arises as a corrective system, advocating that technology must return to its proper role as a servant of wisdom, not its master. 2.3.
Philosophical diagnosis. Knowledge without wisdom.
At the heart of the crisis lies a fundamental philosophical dislocation, the separation between ilm, knowledge, and hikmah, wisdom. In classical Islamic thought, knowledge and wisdom are intertwined. Knowledge without moral purpose leads to chaos, while wisdom without understanding stagnates into passivity. Yet, modern education has celebrated the former and neglected the latter. The digital age measures intelligence by the ability to recall, replicate, and calculate, while neglecting the deeper human capacities to discern, empathize, and serve. Knowledge has become an accumulation of information, not an illumination of the soul. The learner has turned into a consumer, not a seeker. ET restores the sacred unity between knowledge and wisdom by grounding learning in ethical reflection. It invites both educators and learners to see that knowing is a form of becoming, and that the final aim of education is not mastery over the world, but mastery over the self. 2.4. Theoretical foundation, the collapse of meaning systems. The crisis of meaning has been extensively studied by modern thinkers, and ET integrates their insights into its transformative framework. Neil Postman's critique in Technopoly describes how modern societies surrendered their moral judgment to technological authority. Zygmunt Bauman's notion of liquid modernity portrays how all that was once solid, values, truth, and identity, has melted into flexibility and uncertainty. Ziauddin Sardar identifies our era as post-normal times, a condition marked by chaos, contradiction, and complexity where no single narrative can make sense of reality. Complementing these, Syed Muhammad Naqib al-Addaz offers a distinctly Islamic critique, asserting that the modern confusion stems from the loss of adab, the proper order of knowledge and conduct. When adab is lost, knowledge becomes disordered and society becomes disoriented. ET draws from these theories to build an epistemological remedy. Knowledge must be anchored in ethics and technology must be governed by conscience. The true innovation of ET lies in its relinking of the moral and the mental, the spiritual and the systemic. 2.5. Scriptural grounding, divine warning against hollow knowledge. The Quran provides an unambiguous warning against the illusion of superficial knowing.
يعلمون ظاهرا من الحياة الدنيا وهم عن الآخرة هم غافلون.
They know only the outward appearance of the worldly life, but they are heedless of the hereafter.
Quran Surat
Arklum 37.
This verse is not merely theological, it is profoundly educational. It diagnoses the human tendency to mistake external mastery for inner understanding. E.T. reads this verse as a timeless epistemic mirror. The more we expand outwardly in information, the more we risk collapsing inwardly in meaning. The verse thus calls for tazakur, reflection, and tadib, ethical discipline, as the twin processes through which learning attains its spiritual and civilizational purpose. 2.6. Psychological dimensions of the crisis. The digital world has profoundly altered the human psyche. Learners today live under the constant bombardment of stimuli, leading to what psychologists describe as cognitive overload. Attention spans shrink, and the ability to sustain deep thought erodes. The result is a generation that is connected globally but fragmented internally. Emotionally, the digital age cultivates desensitization. The endless scroll of tragedies and triumphs on social media dulls the moral imagination. Empathy becomes performative, and identity becomes dependent on external validation rather than inner conviction. E.T. interprets education as a process of psychological healing. Learning, in this view, is not merely cognitive training but an act of restoring coherence between fikr, thought, dhikr, remembrance, and nazar, ethical vision. The classroom becomes a space for reflection, not just information transfer, a sanctuary for the soul, not merely a system of tests. 2.7. Sociocultural consequences, the hollowing of learning. As the crisis deepened, societies began to treat education as a commodity. Knowledge became a product to be sold, not a virtue to be cultivated. Universities competed for ranking rather than for relevance. Teachers turned into content deliverers, students into consumers of credentials. The dignity of learning, once rooted in humility and reverence, eroded under the weight of market logic. In such a world, adab, the ethical etiquette of knowledge, is forgotten. Respect for teachers fades, patience in study weakens, and the pursuit of truth is replaced by the pursuit of recognition. E.T. seeks to rebuild this ethical foundation by promoting a culture of reflection and community of sincerity. Schools, universities, and institutions are envisioned not as bureaucratic machines, but as gardens of souls where intellectual and moral growth nourish each other. 2.8. Educational reorientation, from data to meaning. The central task of ET is to redesign education so that learning once again becomes a journey of meaning. In the conventional paradigm, education is obsessed with metrics, test scores, degrees, and digital badges. The teacher is seen as a transmitter and the learner as a receptacle. Knowledge is static, and success is quantified. ET proposes an entirely different vision. The purpose of education is transformation, not transmission. The teacher becomes a murabi, a nurturer of minds and hearts. The learner becomes an active co-creator of meaning. Technology is used consciously, not compulsively. Assessment is seen as an opportunity for ethical reflection, not mechanical measurement. In this reorientation, the classroom regains its sacredness. Every lesson is an ayat, sign of God, every learner is an amana, trust, and every act of teaching is an ibadah, devotion. 2.9. Civilizational reflection, between progress and purpose. The meaning crisis is not confined to individual learners, it threatens the very soul of civilization. The 21st century, with all its technological glory, has achieved an unprecedented mastery over nature, but has lost mastery over desire. Humanity builds machines that can think, but not hearts that can feel. This imbalance between progress and purpose forms the existential dilemma of our time. ET envisions a new civilizational direction called Tamadun Tagiri, the transformative civilization. It is a civilization that advances not through domination, but through wisdom, not through acceleration, but through balance. In this vision, technology serves humanity, policy serves ethics, and innovation serves compassion. The ET civilization is one where artificial intelligence is balanced by spiritual intelligence, ensuring that human evolution remains moral, not merely mechanical. 2.10. Summary statement: the humanization of learning. The crisis of meaning in the digital age is, in essence, a crisis of consciousness. It cannot be resolved by more information or faster networks, but only by a return to reflection and ethical integration. The ecosystem transformative education framework restores this lost dimension by transforming education into an act of awakening, an invitation to rediscover what it means to be fully human in an age of machines. ET concludes that the purpose of education is not merely to produce thinkers, but to cultivate reflective souls. The question is no longer what do we know, but who do we become through what we know. As a principle of ET declares, we must not only teach students how to think, but why to think, and for whom. Transition to Academic Unit No. 3. The next section, The Anatomy of the Transformative Ecosystem, will unveil how ET translates its philosophy into a systemic structure, mapping the 4 living processes: policy, Taiban, agile, sustainable culture, that make transformation not a theory, but a continuous ecology of life. Would you like me to now continue with Academic Unit Number 3 in the same narrative paragraph style, complete with deep philosophical structure and visual conceptual model of the ET ecosystem spiral, Prof?